in the introductory talk already, that stereotypes and images are transported by different media, if you want so, by literature, by music, by other things. And this is particularly important if we talk about the Middle East, for example. Everybody knows, almost in Germany, everybody knows Karl May, and many of these images that are transported by the books of Karl May come up when people think of the Middle East. So this is one point I would like to make. So we should distinguish between the news media and those who are these entertainment media. But in this panel, of course, we are talking about the news media in particularly. And then I would also like to distinguish again between those parts of the images that are for which we could blame the media and for which we shouldn't. Because stereotypes are something which is not made up by media. We have the mass media and the news media, when we talk about them, they are not only economical organizations, but they are also cultural organizations. And as a cultural organization, or that means that media are historically grown institutions. And the people who work in the media grew up in a certain society with certain stereotypes represented in that society. And on the other hand, the readers, of course, grew up in a certain society and want to hear these stereotypes, want to hear those topics with which they are familiar with. You mentioned that, Felix Lee, with all the topics you mentioned, the smoke, the drill in the family, etc., etc. Yesterday I read a news about Saudi Arabia, because maybe you read that as well. In Saudi Arabia, women are allowed to drive from 2018 onwards. So why is that a news? This is just the news because we are used to this narrative that in Saudi Arabia and in the Arab region, women are oppressed. And so even if it's in our perspective, it seems to be a positive development that women are allowed to drive, we still have that stereotype in mind that this is something very special, which should be mentioned because it's so extraordinary for that region or for that country. So I think this is a similarity to what you reported, that we should be aware of what is what are historically developed stereotypes and are reproduced in the news, not even consciously, but also unconsciously sometimes, and those which we could in some parts at least blame the media for. And this is, and this was also mentioned by you, certain political and economic developments. In the theory of international news, we know the different concepts that explain that. There's one which is the so-called news geography. That explains why certain countries appear in the media coverage more often than others. And there are, the explanation is that those countries who are direct neighbors, who have political and economic, strong economic or political ties, appear more often in the media than those which don't have these ties. And so China and Germany have strong economic ties, it appears more often than most other parts of the regions, apart maybe from USA and from Russia and the Middle East, but this is only for conflict reasons. And of course, we have some general patterns in news reporting that are called the news criteria, which were also mentioned, which are based on the assumption that the users who are important for news organizations and important for those who decide what is newsworthy and what not, this explains why certain topics appear and others not. And so, for example, if it is involved, if conflict is involved, or as you said, sex and crime and catastrophes, then news are tend to appear more often than others. And this is a pattern which is not only limited to foreign reporting and not only limited to China, but is a very general pattern that appears in the news coverage. There are many other concepts which could help to understand how these images appear and are reproduced, but I think we are running out of time, so I leave those concepts for a later discussion. I will come back to these points later then.
Thank you very much.